Dear colleague Rectores Magnifici, dear Rectores Magnifici Emeriti, dear Commissioner of the King, dear members of our Supervisory Board, dear colleagues, students and staff, ladies and gentlemen, let me all warmly welcome you to this academic ceremony to celebrate this university's 40th birthday. On January 9th, 1976, 40 years and 2 days ago, Her Majesty Queen Juliana signed the official document establishing the Rijksuniversiteit Limburg, today called Maastricht University. The ceremony took place in the neighboring church. In the typical polder fashion, the Rijksuniversity of Limburg, set up to compensate for the closing of the mines in the eastern and western mining region of southern Limburg, became located in Maastricht, a city with a long industrial history in everything but coal mining. And as it became officially a Rijksuniversity, the official signature took place next door in the Catholic St. Servaas Cathedral in the presence of Bishop Jo Gijzen. The bishop, to remind you, who was at the origin of the Pink Saturday movement, when on Eastern Saturday in '79, thousands of gay and lesbians marched through the city of Roermond shouting, "Gijzen, flikker op." But as the year of the mines is now being over, I will not elaborate further on the location of the Rijksuniversiteit in Limburg, nor on our old Rijksuniversity status, which we have since happily left to just Groningen. Indeed, today Groningen needs full Rijks support. 40 years for a university is a very young age. I'm standing here between colleagues, Rectores Magnifici of universities which are in some cases a full decimal point order of magnitude older. And as working at the university seems good for healthy aging, I find myself here also in the company of 5 of the 8 Rectores Magnifici Emeriti this university has known. Koen Hemker, Rector Magnificus from 1982 till 1985. Vic Bonke, Rector Magnificus from 1985 till 91. Job Cohen, who unfortunately could not be here with us today, Rector Magnificus from 91 till 93 and 95 till 97. Hans Philipsen, Rector Magnificus from 93 till 95. Arie Kroesman-Nieuwenhuizen, Rector Magnificus from 98 till 2003. And my predecessor, who outperformed them all, Gerard Mols from 2004 till September 2012. Each one of them contributed in a unique way to the growth and development of this university. We have, in preparing for the 40th anniversary of this university, exploited fully their memories and remembrances and produced 6 short video portraits which are available in their full length from our anniversary website, and of which you will now see a short compilation.
Majesteit, hooggewaardeerde gasten en medewerkers. Met de publicatie van de wet Rijksuniversiteit Limburg in het Staatsblad is de Rijksuniversiteit Limburg op 1 januari 1976 als autonome instelling voor wetenschappelijk onderwijs officieel tot stand gekomen. Vandaag vieren wij dit heugelijke gebeuren nadat in deze academische zitting de nieuwe instelling door Hare Majesteit de Koningin voor geopend zal zijn verklaard. Er is alle reden om de stichting van een universiteit in deze stad feestelijk te gedenken. Zonder overdrijving mag immers worden gezegd dat deze beslissing tot de belangrijkste behoort die ooit werden genomen in de bewogen ontwikkeling van dit deel van ons land. En hiermee verklaar ik deze academische zitting voor geopend.
Hans came from this province. He was a teacher at the Veldeke College, and he had to move to The Hague. So this was for him the inspiration and the stimulation to come back and to found the university here.
I'm quite sure that he felt it as a day of triumph. I think he was, all in all, more a modest man than someone who liked to act out, so to speak.
No, it was a little bit difficult sometimes with Cheng because he was sometimes speaking Maastricht. And then I said, we are State University, Cheng. So you have to say it in normal Dutch.
I wouldn't have come if there would not be a possibility for research, and that's what I told Tans also. And then Tans said to me, well, yes, but we cannot allow all these professors to do their own hobbies. And I said, well, that's not necessary as long as they do mine.
Hooggeachte aanwezigen, het is met vreugde dat ik vandaag Limburg en Maastricht mag gelukwensen met het tot stand komen van de Rijksuniversiteit alhier.
It looks a little bit as if the Queen is not very amused.
My father at that time was rector of the University of Leiden, so he went there and he assisted at the opening. Well, of course he was there, he was rector of the oldest university nearly of the world, and there were some people somewhere in the south of the Netherlands with a new university. What did they think?
De ervaringen in deze proeftuin voor het toekomstig hoger onderwijs zullen ons allen ten zeerste aangaan.
Well, when you look from the front, I was sitting at the extreme right hand, just behind the bishop. Nobody understood very well why he was there, but he was primarily there because otherwise the Sint-Servaaskerk could not be used.
Bedoeld is dat hij uw werk zegene en u op uw wegen begeleiden.
Closing the coal mines was really a disaster for this region. I lived in this region when I was a young child. And it was all focused on the coal mines and the heavy industry over here. And almost everyone depended economically and socially from the coal mines. And when these were closed, that was really a disaster for many, many people. So we need, I think, a new perspective. And the university, and later on the academic hospital, could deliver that new perspective for the people and for the province.
The reason that the university was started here was not only because of the socio-economic problems after the closure of the mines, but there were huge difficult problems in the universities. We just had passed the period of the revolution in the university, which started in Paris. And it was due to the fact that there was an enormous increase of the enrollment of students in the universities. And what the university did is to make the lecture halls bigger and so change from active learning to passive learning. So there were huge problems.
It was the idea that times they were changing, and that what was needed was a new spirit in especially education.
Tiddens came up with the idea of small-scale teaching following a problem-based approach, which he had learned from Hamilton.
Uitgangspunt zijn problemen, ontleend aan de medische praktijk. De student
But Schenk Tans saw very well that if you wanted to start a new university, although it was for different reasons, you had to be special. And problem-based learning, he saw very well that was a special thing which made it possible to start with the university.
Als onze gasten te mogen ontmoeten. En daarmee verklaar ik de eerste academische zitting van de Rijksuniversiteit Limburg voor gesloten.
As I already said, 40 years for a university is a very young age. But 40 years in anybody's working life is a long period. I myself am particularly proud to have been part of this university for the last 30 years. to have seen it grow firsthand and develop and adjust itself to the different environments within which it found itself operating. The first instant institution phase, the first 6 years, when the new Rijksuniversiteit was barely tolerated by The Hague, with a primarily local medical function, with the basic philosophy of the medical faculty being academically anchored and subsequently enlarged to include health sciences. A second phase as national newcomer, the period 82-92, with the creation of the faculties of law, economics, and cultural sciences being set up, making the aim of 6,000 students reachable. And a third phase, the last 26 years, the period following the EMU summit in Maastricht, when the Rijksuniversity Limburg went international with the attraction of students first from neighboring borders and later on from farther places in Europe and across the world. To remind my Rectores Magnifici colleagues, South Limburg has a foreign border of 220 kilometers and a 6-kilometer domestic funnel with the rest of the Netherlands. So today, we have about 16,000 students, of which half are foreign or ignoring borders, of which half are from the surrounding neighborhood of Maastricht, defined here as within a 100-kilometer radius of Maastricht, i.e. including Eindhoven, Den Bosch and Tilburg, but not, for instance, Nijmegen, but including now also Brussels, Antwerp, Louvain, Hasselt, Liège, Namur, Charleroi, Cologne, Bonn, Düsseldorf and Duisburg. It was, in other words, in the logic of both the location, a peripheral border city in the Netherlands, closer to Belgium and Germany than to the rest of the Netherlands, and the timing, a phase of strong belief in the advantages of economic and political European integration, that Maastricht University could emerge and rapidly develop. The strategic question for a university celebrating its 40th anniversary in 2016 is whether these conditions of the previous century are still valid today, or whether they are rather now part of our history. Indeed, it is difficult at the beginning of this new year not to be struck by the sheer speed and all-encompassing nature at which global challenges have been confronting us over the last years. As if time itself is no longer subject to steady linear change, but to exponential or at least chaotic change. And yet, when looking closer, none of these global challenges, whether they have to do with the current list of popular global challenges, such as migration, climate change, terrorism, or with those of last year, pandemics, remember Ebola, Brexit, or the TTIP debate, are new. They have been with us for years, if not decades, and their implications on future development and well-being have been analyzed and studied both in theory and practice by many of us. So how come that global change seems to impact us much more, as if we woke suddenly up last year, this year, in a different, practically out of control, less secure, more globalized world? At first sight, one would be tempted to say because we, as academics, do insufficiently play our role in feeding those debates with scientific evidence and arguments, and leave the scoring open to opinion makers. And indeed, social media interchanges seem increasingly to take academic truth claims as more or less arbitrary, driven rather by personal or institutional interests than factual insights. The democratization of science has meant that one is increasingly looking for 2-minute answers put in black and white terms with little room for doubt. Yet the complexity, uncertainty, and ambiguity of contemporary knowledge often implies that claims will now be contested and will leave room for different interpretations. In short, knowledge often increases the experience of uncertainty rather than reducing it. And uncertainty coming from an academic is something which it is difficult to sell to the public at large. It has led many scientists to leave the public field, to prefer to remain cocooned within their own field of knowledge, within the certainty of the ivory tower of excellence recognition. The latter often being the only thing on which reputation and academic career development will be built, with only publications in serious journals written first and foremost for another academic peer audience. Yet most of the global challenges which draw today media attention are challenges which cross disciplines. I would even presume that for many of us, many of the global challenges are, from our own disciplinary perspective, relatively straightforward problems, relatively easily solvable. Let me give you some personal examples. My personal most famous moment of international media glory was probably some 20 years ago when a reference was made in the Wall Street Journal front page, on the Wall Street Journal front page, of the outrage of the Bill Clinton administration and Bill Clinton himself to some crazy European, i.e. me, who had suggested that as internet would undermine the national capacity of states to levy taxation, one should investigate the possibility of introducing a bit tax, a tax on internet use. Reminding Faraday's famous quote at the moment of his invention of electricity, "Sir, I don't know what it is good for, but one day it will be taxed." I argued that the new consumer and business value generated by internet and digital technologies more broadly would remain by and large outside the scope of national taxation. Nothing came of the idea, as Paul de Grauwe will remember, but it remains something which, as a simple economist, I still believe in as part of the currently needed tax shift. It remains striking to see today how staggering the earnings per employee are of the top 5 high-tech internet companies. Apple, 1.86 million revenues, earnings per employee. Google, 1.5 million. SoftBank, 910,000. Microsoft, 732,000, etc. And how little the digital exchange of goods and services has contributed to government public finances. The second example relates to the use of fossil fuels and climate change. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, with my colleagues at Merit, I would consider the climate change issue as a relatively straightforward economic problem, consisting by and large of economic policy failures. A typical market failure related to pricing correctly the negative externalities of fossil fuel use, and a public failure with many countries providing large subsidies to fossil fuel users. Not something one would need to spend decades on to arrive at political COP agreements between states. Again, I still remember vividly how I pleaded with Canaro and Joritsen here in Maastricht back in '92, how a gradual global increase in fossil fuel prices could become a relatively easily implementable global policy measure, for instance, by no longer allowing oil and gas prices to fall, which would allow for good economic stability, good for providing incentives for the development of alternative energy technologies. Again, it is striking to see how today, the day when the oil price went to the lowest level in 12 years, how the CO2 emission market and how declining oil prices are undercutting the use and diffusion of alternative sustainable energy technologies. Another policy advice thrown in the dustbin. In short, once the complexity of the global implementation of such straightforward policy advice is taken into account, our disciplinary approach in addressing those issues loses much of its appeal, at some stage even representing a rather caricature of the problem addressed. Last year, I participated in an interesting open brainstorming debate in Cambridge with the Dalai Lama and Lord Rowan Williams, the previous Archbishop of the UK, which provided, certainly for a simple economist like myself, a lot of inspiration, particularly in relation to the global nature of the challenges before us. While many conflicts might appear local in first instance, in second close reading they always appear in one way or another interlinked at a more global level. Indeed, as Lord Williams put it, crises do not read maps. Solutions can hence not be found in local or national policy settings, and for sure not in isolating or protecting oneself. Furthermore, as our societies grow materially richer, they seem to become obsessed with fear. To media even become addicted to fear. Fear which leads to habits, to individuals sometimes even corporate inaction, and to the accumulation of physical wealth beyond what can be reasonably consumed in a lifespan. In short, the ultimate paradox of individual wealth is best illustrated today by the gated, fenced, secured environment in which one finds oneself locked with everything but security. As the Dalai Lama put it, ultimately, security for myself and for my neighbor are inseparable. Elsewhere is here. One can, I would claim, detect similar trends in our academic world. Career fear leading to an addiction to disciplinary recognition, obsession with the search for peer assessment of excellence, performance measures based on well-established norms and habits. Yet most of the global challenges mentioned earlier ask for much more. Elsewhere is here, also in research, also in science. Elsewhere does not, in other words, refer just to a geographical dimension, but also to an intellectual one. To engage creativity from elsewhere in research as a habit-breaking tool, as I'm sure the Dies lecture of Mark Post will illustrate in a minute. But I've been going on for too long. Let me give you, in concluding my talk, a rather concrete, but again simple, I remain a simple economist, as my colleagues know very well in the executive board, proposal in how one could further contribute to habit-breaking creativity in research. Having in each of our research labs, departments, research schools or institutes an artist in residence, participating fully in the support or even research activities within the lab, but adding a different perspective. Maastricht University is uniquely placed to introduce such a model with the presence of the Conservatorium, the Jan van Eyck Academy, and the many other arts institutes and programs of Zuidhogeschool. Ron Heren, our university professor and Limburg chair in the field of molecular imaging, suggested, for instance, to ask such an artist in residence from the Conservatorium to compose a symphony for cello and mass spectrometry, whereby the specific sounds of the new link instruments in his research lab, the music of science, could be linked to the cello. Over the last month, discussing these ideas with colleagues, I've been struck by the creativity of ideas which emerge when reflecting further on the idea of an artist in residence. But it is time to conclude. Ladies and gentlemen, let me use this opportunity to hopefully creatively challenge a Dies habit, and that is the one of the musical intermezzo. May I invite you to listen, but also to watch a musical video from Playing for Change, in which musicians from across the world participate, connected through the internet. A perfect illustration of the global nature of research and science. It should become, I would suggest, our open science hymn. It starts with a single street performer, Roger Ridley, on Santa Monica in California, and the rest you will see. And for those of you who have seen the video before, I added one twist. Music, please.